Welcome to Coming Home, Survive and Thrive in Homeschooling. This week I am returning to a saying you have heard me say in previous podcasts, that is, how to think and not what to think. I strongly advise it to be one of the goals in your homeschooling life. I'm talking about it today as recently a teacher told me about parents restricting social contacts of their young children to try and prevent them from becoming sick or from getting COVID. I've been thinking a bit about it lately, and I can't help wondering about the process parents are using to come to their decision. Is it based on how to think or a result of what to think because of fear? And going on from that, what about the decisions we continue to make in our lives? How do we know if we're really thinking it through rather than going with majority decision or what we're being told to think and therefore what to do? It has surprised me to hear of such restrictions, and there are some who practically exclude all but the family and perhaps some extended family, so that means no preschool play groups or anything of that nature. I understand the last couple of years has made fear so normal. We don't realise we have fear affecting our decisions. Thinking in a fearful manner has become normalised. Looking from the outside in to families such as this, I understand the parents' fear and that they love their child so much they don't want her to get sick. With the response, they'll do anything to prevent it, to the extent of little contact with others. But I suggest fear has blinded them to what I thought parents knew, that it's normal and healthy for a young child to have friends and socialise with other little ones their age. It forms so much of how they see the world, and I'm trying to make sense of this week. I'm not actually sure that by the time I get to the end of this podcast, I will have made any sense out of it. I'm unpicking what it means to teach your child how to think and not what to think, and how to ensure that you too, as the adults in their lives, at all times are trying to be vigilant with what you are thinking and the decisions you're making to be the result of really thinking about the situation and the decisions that you're making, rather than just being told what to think and just going and following what some authority has told you because you've been blinded by fear. The great clinical psychologist that I have quoted more than once on this podcast, and I don't hesitate to quote him again, Dr. Jordan Peterson, he speaks about how very important it is for your children to be socialized by their peers, and he talks about it in detail in one of his books. I will put the link below. He said it's vital for your child to be socialized by the time she is 4. If it does not happen by the time she is 4, it will affect her development for the rest of her life, because that's the crucial time in a child's psychology that this natural occurrence needs to happen. Peterson goes through and he draws the examples of how puppies socialize each other and they nip each other and they help teach each other how to relate as puppies. Children aren't puppies, I totally get that, but he's using it as an example. And children, when they're relating to each other, it's very different from when the young child is there and she's got the parents or the grandparent who are absolutely devoted to the child. But they've lived life and they've been shaped and they know how to behave because they're adults. Children, for better or for worse sometimes, because they get a bit tussled around in the playground of childhood. But it's so necessary for your child. And so this week I've been thinking about this and how, because her parents are trying to protect her, she's actually being harmed, damaged in a different kind of way. that far outweighs the risk of any sickness she would get if she came into somebody who would pass on a virus to her. There's a second aspect to this as well. I was listening to a medical podcast this week that came out of the UK. There are some puzzling hepatitis cases amongst young children, and it's a type of hepatitis that is rare. It has been on the increase, and as the data has come in and they have studied the why this is actually happening, they've put it down to what happened in the pandemic when so many young children were isolated from other people. They were prevented in the normal course of living, of not coming into contact with a many number of people than what was just in their immediate bubble. And so their immunities were not being exposed to the everyday viruses and pathogens that we have been exposed to for millennia. If you know even the basics of biology, you'll know that this is absolutely vital, and that if you're protected from not getting certain diseases, your immunity will not be as strong, so that even when less dangerous viruses come along, and if you have got a robust immune system, it is really, really good because it's been designed that way to be able to resist that virus, and either you'll just get a small dose of what it is that's going around, or maybe you will actually get sick, but your immune system is set up to combat that illness and get on with the business of healing you. These young children had not been exposed to, it was two different viruses. One is a lot more common in the environment than the other, but because the children hadn't been across these, now after a couple of years of being isolated, they were going back out into the community, and now the two viruses were interacting with each other, and they were causing this event to happen in the child's liver, which was a serious form of hepatitis. I'm going to link that podcast below as well for you. So all around, especially in the West, but in other countries around the world, as a result of the lockdown policies that we had that have gone on for more than 2 years in some countries, that's a significant amount of time for everyone, but for little children whose immune systems and physiologies were unnaturally interrupted, it's starting to look like any perceived benefits that a lockdown, etc., would bring to the health of the community are maybe being outweighed by unintended consequences. Hence, my referencing the other info about the result of why these raised rates of a certain hepatitis, a rare form of hepatitis, are now being documented in the UK amongst young children. Bring it back to us. This is about our homes, your families, these precious children that you have chosen to not delegate to the public education system, and you're taking this on yourself. That required thinking. My challenge for you today is you never ever stop thinking and questioning why you are making a decision or behaving in a certain way or choosing to do or not do something. Up until now, I've been saying today and in other podcasts that this is about your children, teaching them how to think. Well, I'm talking to you today as the adult. We're at a disadvantage over our children because we're teaching them the how to think practically from scratch, but we grew up in the system that told us what to think, and that's what we're used to, and that's what we default to in times of emergency and in times of fear. Use the example that I've related to you today about this family that is in overprotection out of love for their daughter, but they're unknowingly harming her. Now, take that back to you. Never be afraid to give yourself a mini audit as to, well, why are you homeschooling? On a difficult day or when someone challenges you, can you methodically go back and say why you are homeschooling? Is there something in your why that needs to be revisited? Do you need to unpack it a little bit more so that you know I'm not talking about on the dark days you need to know why. I've dealt with that before. This is about all of the ongoing situations that are going to continue to come up in your life. But when you're feeling like you're making decisions that don't go with the majority, usually that's actually a good sign. Well, homeschooling's not going with the majority, is it? So you're in good company. The object is not to be belligerent and to be countercultural just for the hell of it. You've got to know your why. And when you feel like you're the only one, it's really, really difficult. One of the things that you can ask is, what is the motivation of your requested action, even from coming inside yourself or somebody who's directly asking you, or perhaps the government or a medical authority or a school or a hospital is asking you to behave in a way that has taken you by surprise or isn't actually what you want to do. Just step back and ask, what is the motivation for this request? Does it come from fear of what will happen to you if you don't do this thing? Who's benefiting from these requests? Companies being paid big dollars if you take a certain medicine, or staff or hospitals who may or may not be being paid a bonus per patient with a certain illness? What about the motivation of peer pressure? That's actually huge. Even as adults, we are still subject to the peer pressure around us. The tall poppy syndrome is a real thing, and it takes courage to say, no, we're not going to do that. But you need to know why. Then there's the motivation of needing to be seen to do the right thing, even if you're not sure it is, or if you have doubts even that it is, but the pressure of being seen to do the right thing is really strong. Give yourself time to think, delay a response, and seek wise advice from people that you trust. Be sure to do research and ask people who aren't just going to tell you what you want to know or hear. And what's your motivation as a parent on behalf of your child? Naturally, you're afraid of your child becoming sick. Well, what's actually wrong with the child being sick? They've been sick for millennia. Natural sicknesses that children got, and many of them died from, are just not really an issue now. So you need to be able to unpack, what is this fear of your child being sick? It's natural to be sick. Sickness can help build up an immunity, and when it doesn't, there's often medicines that can actually help. So how much research is actually over the top? Well, you need to do some research, but most of us do not have the time. So you can go to both extremes on this. You can say, well, I don't have any time, so I'm just going to take the research that this person here does because I like their research. Well, a very wise person, I think it was St. Paul actually, said, test all things. Now, I realize he was talking theology, but theology actually overrides everything in your life. God's just not something that you put on a certain shelf and get out every Sunday. It's about your entire life. So test all things. You can't test all things if you're only seeking medical research or parenting research from one source only. For example, if I only mention Dr. Jordan Peterson, that would be really lazy on my part. Yes, he's a great clinical psychologist, but he's not the only voice out there, and he sure as heck isn't perfect. The same goes with medical research. If you are doing your research based on what the main media is telling you, the chances are actually pretty high that what you're being told on main media does not come from the motivation that has your best interests for your child at heart. Start peeling back those layers of motivation and find out what is the motivation of the mainstream media. I'll give you a clue. Most of them are in the pay of the government to get the information that they want you to react on into the homes. So if that's your only source of research, can I please encourage you, broaden your media intake. I'm not saying close yourself off from it. Just collect together a range of varying opinions of media to help you figure out what to do. Stop trying to make a perfect decision and make the very best one that you can based on the information that you have got today. And constantly ask yourself, Is this still the best research out there? Has there been more data come in as time goes by? Another way to tell whether you may or may not be making the right decision, especially if what you're being asked to do is not usual. What does tradition teach you to do? What does your experience teach you to do, and those around you whom you acknowledge have done parenting well, and not just the latest parenting fad that comes along? Your children are not lab experiments, and you don't get to reset something if the optimal age is past. Counselling rooms are full of adults that have some dysfunction tracked back to their childhood. There's going to be an ongoing business for decades because of the recent government policy responses, which I think have far outweighed the perceived benefits of the massive social upheavals that we've had. Counselling will help you manage what is innate in you because of your growing up. And to be really clear, every single one of us as an adult should probably be in a counselling room because nobody had perfect parents. And you're not a perfect parent either. And I'm sure, as I am along with my husband, that as we look back over raising 5 children, we made mistakes, but we didn't make them on purpose. They were made with the best information that we had at the time. But maybe the decisions we made for our older children were somewhat revised by the time we got to our younger children. Time just does that to you. So I'm not trying to put the fear of God into you as a parent, that you're to be afraid that you're going to stuff your child up for life. There is a healthy fear, I think, that's always a possibility, which should keep us. That could be your only motivation, to be humbly, literally if necessary, or metaphorically on your knees in humility as you try to constantly go through, why are you making decisions for your children? How are you going to move through these difficult times that we are in? I can only hope and pray that the parents and other families in the same situation, and I don't judge them, they're trying their best in a very tricky world out there for families. But I hope and I pray that they will come across somebody whom they respect enough to listen to revisit and maybe change tack on this aspect of their parenting decisions that they're making. The tragedy of all this is I get the sense that this is just a microcosm of what's going on out in the community at the moment. I'd heard rumours and read stories and listened to podcasts where other people had indicated that this was going on, but this is the first time that it's crossed my life in a way that's impacted me. That's about it for this week, really. Like I said, I don't have any answers here. There are no answers. Just keep on doing your best. Be the best parent that you are, continually trying to build in your parenting skills, and above all, keep going down that godly path of not only teaching your children how to think, but keep honing that skill for yourself too. That's it from me this week. I will catch up with you next week. Bye-bye for now.